The authorities and surviving family members knew for decades who was responsible for a crime spree that touched western Pennsylvania in 1977 till 1978. But even after 40 years in prison, the suspect would not confess. Edward Surratt was born on August 8, 1941, in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. He was the son of successful entrepreneur Arthur Surratt. He spent his childhood and adolescence in an abusive environment. Surratt attended Aliquippa High School, where he studied up to 8th grade, graduating with honors, and most of his friends had a positive outlook of him. However, starting in the 9th grade, he lost interest in studying and began to spend more time on the street, which led him to engaging in crime in the late 1950s. In 1959, he was arrested for disturbing the peace, but escaped with a fine. That same year, due to chronic absenteeism and poor performance, he was kicked out of school, but after being persuaded by his parents, he returned the following year and graduated. After leaving school, Surratt was arrested a second time for disturbing the peace, hitting the arresting officer in the face. He was convicted of assault and sentenced to 14 months imprisonment at SCI Camp Hill Range in Cumberland County. After his release, and with the financial support of his parents, Surratt moved to Ohio and entered Youngstown University in Ohio. He quickly lost interest in studying, and in 1963, he was expelled and returned to his parents' home. Over the next year, he did odd jobs and engaged in low-skilled labor before being drafted in the Army in March 1964. He served at Fort Dix, New Jersey, where he was disciplined at least twice. Once for injuring a colleague with a pipe during a fight and abandoning his post. And later, he was arrested by local police for dangerous driving and illegal weapons possession. The next year, in August, Surratt was dismissed from the Army and returned to Aliquippa, where he inherited the business of his late father, who had passed away in June of that year due to complications from throat cancer. Due to his inexperience and various other circumstances, he went bankrupt, and to escape his monetary difficulties, he enlisted in the Marine Corps in October 1966. After he completed his training in the spring of 1967, he was sent to Vietnam. As part of a tank battalion, he fought during the Tet Offensive against the Viet Cong. In 1969, during one of the skirmishes, he was wounded in the chest and severely concussed following an explosion, which ruptured his eardrum. Over the next several months, he received treatment at a military hospital, from which he was released in the summer of 1970. In September, Surratt was demobilized and returned to the USA. In total, between 1967 and 1970, he took part in a total of 11 military operations, for which he was later awarded the Gallantry Cross and the Purple Heart. After returning from the war, Surratt married and moved to North Carolina, where he soon found a job as a truck driver. During this period, he began to exhibit antisocial behavior and signs of PTSD. In 1973, he was arrested in Virginia Beach, Virginia, on charges of attempting to assault a 13-year-old boy. He was found guilty and was convicted in March 1974. After serving less than 4 years in prison, Surratt was paroled and released in January 1977, after which he returned to Aliquippa. In April 1978, Edward Surratt came under police suspicion for at least 27 unsolved crimes that happened in Ohio and Pennsylvania. At the time, he was working as a truck driver for a company based in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was eventually arrested and interrogated, but denied any responsibility for all the crimes. And since there was no evidence linking him to them, he was released. On June 1st, 1978, 66-year-old Luther Langford was fatally beaten with a baseball bat in his home in Western Columbia, South Carolina. His wife had also been beaten, but she managed to survive. A few days later, on June 6th, Surratt was seen driving Luther's car in his hometown of Aliquippa. While being arrested, Surratt, in spite of several warning shots, fiercely resisted 7 officers and managed to escape. hiding in a nearby metallurgical plant on the Ohio River. The police conducted a search operation, which ended in vain, after which Surratt was put on a wanted list. While the police were examining the interior of Luther's car, the police found a bat with Surratt's fingerprints. They also found a number of items belonging to a 30-year-old disabled Vietnam War veteran, Joseph Weinman, and his wife, 29-year-old Catherine, who were beaten till their end on September 30th, 1977, in their Marshall Township, Pennsylvania home. Surratt was also a suspect in the ending of the lives of Frank Ziegler, Richard Hyde, and his wife Donna, William Adams and his wife Nancy, Guy Mills and his wife Laura, and Joel Kruger. 28-year-old Frank Ziegler was shot with a .38 caliber revolver on September 27, a few hundred meters away from the Weinman couple's house. 34-year-old Richard Hyde and his wife Donna were fatally shot with a shotgun at their Moon Township home on December 4th. 29-year-old William Adams and his wife Nancy were slain in their home on November 20th in Fallston, Pennsylvania. William's corpse was found at his home, while his wife's remains missing. On New Year's Eve, 1977, 64-year-old Guy Mills, his wife Laura, and 36-year-old Joel Kruger were all slain by an assailant with a shotgun. In addition, credit card receipts and a number of other evidence showed that Surratt was in Boardman, Ohio, not far from where another similar crime occurred. This made him a prime suspect in all the cases. Surratt's Florida trial began in the fall of 1978 in Volusia County. He was found guilty of burglary, assault involving indecent assault, and threatening to take people's lives by a jury on September 20th. On October 27th, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences and an additional 200 years imprisonment. Following this trial, he was extradited to Lexington County, South Carolina, where he was tried for the case of Luther Langford and attempting to end the life of his wife. In the summer of 1979, he was found guilty and was given 2 additional life sentences. At his first trial, Surratt confessed to taking the life of 56-year-old John Shelkins, who was shot with a shotgun at his home in Baden, Pennsylvania on January 7, 1978, as well as attacking his wife Catherine, who was beaten severely but survived. However, in view of him already being sentenced to long terms of imprisonment, the Beaver County prosecutors refused to prosecute or formally charge Surratt in 1980. On May 8, 1993, during a transfer to a prison in Polk County, he attempted to escape by attacking a police officer and seizing his vehicle, but was prevented from doing so. He was charged with attempted escape, convicted in May 1994, and received an additional 2 years and 6 months imprisonment. In 2007, Surratt inexplicably confessed to 6 additional crimes. The case of David and Linda Hamilton, committed on September 20th, 1977, in Beaver Township, Mahoning County, Ohio, as well as the case of 63-year-old John Davis and his 61-year-old wife, Mary, who was fatally shot with a shotgun in Beaver Township in November 1977. Surratt also claimed to have ended the life of 17-year-old John Feeney, who was fatally shot on October 22, 1977, in Findlay Township, Pennsylvania, while trying to meet his 16-year-old fiancée, Renee Greger. After finding John's body, Renee was reported missing, with her fate remaining a mystery. According to Surratt, after ending the life of John, he took Renee hostage and took her to a wooded area, where he threatened to assault her before shooting her in the mouth and burying the body. Surratt agreed to indicate Renee and Linda's burial sites, as well as to testify in other cases in exchange for a transfer to a penitentiary in South Carolina. The conditions there were much more lenient, but his offer was denied, however, and ultimately, no agreement was reached. In 2021, while imprisoned at Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida, Surratt confessed to the Pennsylvania State Police that he had taken the lives of William and Nancy Adams, Guy and Laura Mills, Joel Kruger, and John Shelkins. The Pennsylvania district attorneys in the counties where the crimes occurred agreed not to prosecute Surratt due to the life sentences he is already serving. An Eastern Shore Correctional Institution officer was fatally shot while he was on his way home after his evening shift. His perpetrator remained a free man until he was finally arrested. On June 4, 2001, 31-year-old Gregory Guy Collins of Vienna was on his way home after his shift at Eastern Shore Correctional Institute, ECI, in Princess Anne in Somerset County, Maryland. Gregory was reported missing at about 4 p.m. when he failed to return home after his evening shift at ECI. He had reportedly finished his shift at about midnight and was driving a gray Toyota pickup truck at the time. A Maryland state trooper that was on his way to take a statement for the missing persons report when he saw a reflection from the pickup truck that had traveled off of the road in a wooded area along Indiantown Road, east of Route 331. Gregory was found unresponsive inside his vehicle. He was shot in the back of the head at about 1 a.m., and his Toyota pickup was found covered in foliage off the main road, apparently where the truck coasted after he was shot. Gregory was a 3-year veteran of the Division of Correction and a member of the Maryland National Guard. He was married and had a 5-month-old daughter at the time of his demise. The case went cold and remained unsolved until 2019, 18 years later, when tips led investigators to a former Eastern Correctional Institution inmate, John Michael Ingersoll Jr. Ingersoll was arrested and indicted on the charges in September 2019. He has previously been convicted of battery, disorderly conduct, burglary, theft, trespass, and marijuana possession. He was serving time at ECI for burglary and theft convictions in 1997, but he was released from prison in 2000. The trial was delayed to give the prosecution adequate preparation time and was postponed until June 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Ingersoll entered a plea of not guilty in Dorchester Circuit Court, contending that the evidence seized in the case was the result of an illegal search and seizure, interception of wire or oral communication. On June 7th, it took a Dorchester County jury just under 2 hours to find Ingersoll guilty on all charges following an emotional 5-day trial. Gregory's family was present when the jury delivered its verdict, including his wife and his daughter. Dorchester County State's Attorney Bill Jones said that the jury heard evidence from a witness that Ingersoll laid waiting for Gregory on Indiantown Road and shot him through the back window of his pickup truck. The state's case against Ingersoll said that he had received orders to end Gregory's life from a gang Ingersoll was affiliated with while he was serving in Eastern Correctional Institution in Somerset County. Jones said that Ingersoll and Gregory had a confrontation while the former was incarcerated at ECI, with Gregory calling Ingersoll's mother a lady of the night. The gang's leadership heard of Ingersoll's threat to end the corrections officer and ordered him to carry out the crime. During an emotional hearing on November 5, 2021, Circuit Judge Brett Wilson sentenced then 48-year-old John Michael Ingersoll Jr. to life in jail without the possibility of parole, the maximum sentence. An additional 20 years were added for using an illegally possessed handgun. He will serve the remainder of his sentence in a maximum security jail. Mark Vernarelli, spokesperson for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, wrote in a statement, "The public safety community is very close-knit and was devastated by the ending of the life of Officer Collins. Many correctional officers, parole and probation agents, and department executives rallied around the Collins family and the officer's prison colleagues." After Gregory's demise, colleagues from Eastern Correctional Institution, the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services began fundraising to help his daughter. They held an annual crab feast, during which they raised thousands of dollars over the years to help his daughter. The state police worked with the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the Baltimore Division of the FBI, and several other law enforcement agencies. In a tear-filled statement, Gregory's widow, Lena Williams, told the court about the intense emptiness and heartbreak she has felt in the 20 years since his demise, saying that there would always be a hole in her heart. She also described her depression and fear following the crime. along with the anger she feels towards Ingersoll for robbing her daughter Sydney of a life with and memories of her father. When Sydney was old enough to understand, Lena had to tell her that her father had been slain. She said, "A conversation a mother should never have with a child." Despite losing Gregory, Lena made sure that Sydney grew up knowing that her father was a great and unselfish man. Sydney, who is an adult now, said, "I just wish I had one conversation with my dad." When Sydney spoke in front of the court, she tearfully described the pain of having her dad ripped out of her life before it ever truly began, along with the tough realization that she will never be able to make memories with him. She shared some of her everyday battles, depression, anxiety, and abandonment issues, and the constant fear that one of her loved ones could be taken out of her life in the same way as her dad. The persistent memories were also hard for Sydney to escape. She had to pass by the crime scene on Indiantown Road every day when she was in elementary school. She said, "I can never get my father back, but I can get closure." A choked-up Ingersoll addressed Lena and Sydney, apologizing for the pain his actions had caused to their family. Ingersoll said, adding that the real perpetrator was still out there, "I am sorry my lies caused you pain, but that is all they were, lies." At the front of the room, Lena wiped away tears of relief while standing next to her daughter Sydney. Ingersoll's wife approached the two with tears in her eyes and hugged Sydney, saying that she still did not believe that he had done it. Gregory's name was recently added to the National Law Enforcement Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. A video remembering and honoring him during the memorial was posted by the Maryland Department of Public Safety. The brutal crime against Laney Lee McGadney fractured her family beyond repair. For 40 years, there were very little leads in the case, with no one being held responsible, until an arrest was made thanks to DNA testing. On March 29, 1982, 28-year-old Laney McGadney was last seen alive by her 4 children. She was heading out on foot to the grocery store in Columbia, Maryland's Owen Brown Village. Witnesses reported seeing a man grab Laney and force her into his car on Oakland Mills Road. Her body turned up in a vacant lot 3 hours later. Laney had been assaulted, her throat was slashed, and she had been stabbed more than 30 times. Howard County Police were unable to identify her perpetrator in a lengthy investigation, and the case went cold. Almost 4 decades later, in 2021, cold case detectives revisited Laney's case and tested DNA evidence from a napkin that was found at the crime scene. The DNA matched to a 64-year-old out-of-work truck driver named Howard Jackson Bradbury Jr. of Laurel, Maryland. The police arrested Bradbury in May 2021 at his Laurel home. He was charged with kidnapping, first and second-degree slaying, and first and second-degree assault. Neighbors recalled him from decades before, upon his arrest. One person said, "I do not think anyone is really surprised that he was on the wrong side of the law." On July 12, 2022, Bradbury entered an Alford plea to second-degree slaying, a plea in which a defendant maintains innocence but acknowledges that there is enough evidence to convict them. On January 5, 2023, Howard County Circuit Court Judge Richard Bernhardt sentenced Bradbury to 25 years in prison. State's Attorney Rich Gibson said in a statement, "For 4 decades, no one was held responsible for the brutal and senseless crime of a young woman whose life was cut short by the violent actions of the defendant." We hope that today's guilty plea provides some closure to the McGadney family, who has had to wait an inordinate amount of time for justice for their loved one. We know today's sentencing cannot bring back the matriarch of this family, but we do hope it provides some much-needed closure for her 4 kids, 22 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. Knowing Bradbury will spend the rest of his life in prison for the innocent life he took and heinous crime he committed. Gibson said, "He is likely to perish in prison. Is it possible that he could get out? Sure, it is remotely possible, but unlikely. And I think that result is just in light of the harm that he inflicted on our community and this family in particular." Laney's eldest daughter said, "She has a lot of grandchildren she never met. Whatever you do in the darkness will come to the light." A kidnapping and assault case in Connecticut that happened in 1984 was finally solved after decades thanks to DNA evidence that was finally matched to the perpetrator. The victim finally received justice for the horrific act that was committed towards her. In the early morning hours of April 13, 1984, a woman was found bound, naked, and slumped over the steering wheel of a vehicle in Avon, Connecticut. As the woman was getting out of her car at her apartment complex, she was forced back into her car by the perpetrator. He blindfolded her and bound her arms before he drove her to another location, where he tied her to a tree and beat and assaulted her. She survived the attack and managed to blow the horn of the vehicle to alert help. When the police arrived, they took the victim to a hospital where an examination kit was completed. The police in Avon collected DNA from the crime scene, but the state crime lab was not able to identify a suspect at the time. The information was entered into a national database, but the case went cold. In 2021, the police were notified by the crime lab that a match was found to the DNA from the 1984 case. The DNA matched to then 75-year-old George Legere of Springfield, Massachusetts. Legere had a DNA sample taken from him when he was released from a prison sentence for another crime in Massachusetts. The police arrested Legere while he was in Hampton County Jail and House of Correction. He was charged with 3 counts of kidnapping in the first degree. Due to the statute of limitations that has expired, he could not be charged for indecent assault. Legere is a former Windsor, Connecticut resident who attended the University of California, Los Angeles, and has a master's degree in computer science. He has a lengthy criminal record dating to the 1960s that includes arrests and convictions in more than 30 criminal cases, including other convictions for indecent assault, kidnapping, and negligent ending of lives. A Superior Court jury found George Legere guilty of kidnapping in the first degree in May of 2023. Legere has been sentenced on July 21st, 2023 to 25 years in prison. Hartford State's attorney Charmise Walcott said, "Special thank you needs to be given to the Avon Police Department for the work they did and in keeping this case on their radar. It is unfortunate that the victim had to relive this horrific nightmare while testifying before a jury, but we sincerely appreciate her willingness to come forward and see the process through." A new DNA forensic genetic genealogy program from the Washington State Office of the Attorney General was used to help solve an assault case of a 17-year-old girl in 2003. In 2003, a 17-year-old girl was kidnapped on Church Road when she returned from work to her McCleary, Washington State home. The kidnapper bound her, put her into her own vehicle, and took her to an undisclosed location where he indecently assaulted her. After the assault, he drove her to a location near McCleary and left her in the vehicle. She managed to get free and escape. DNA evidence was collected at the time, but no matches were found in a nationwide criminal database for years, and the case went cold. A breakthrough in the case emerged 17 years later, in December 2020, when the evidence was sent to a lab for genealogy testing. The lab results allowed the investigators to create a short list of people who may be related to the suspect. The investigators eventually focused on Paul Bieker, who lived near the girl's home in 2003. After watching him, the detectives got his DNA from a cup he threw away. On June 9, 2021, the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab compared the new sample with the old sample and found a match. They also were able to identify more circumstantial evidence that linked Bieker to the crime. The deputies then arrested 50-year-old Bieker. He was booked into the Grays Harbor County Jail. On June 16, Bieker pleaded not guilty to charges of assault, kidnapping, burglary, felony harassment, and taking a motor vehicle without permission. After a 3-day trial in 2022, a jury convicted Bieker of felony assault in the first degree with deliberate cruelty. The case was the first conviction and sentencing resulting from funds the Attorney General's office provided for forensic genetic genealogy research to help solve a cold case. The statute of limitations on kidnapping and other charges had expired. However, the aggravating factor allowed Grays Harbor County Superior Court Judge David Mistachkin to elongate Bieker's prison sentence. On July 8, 2022, Paul James Bieker was sentenced to 30 years in prison.